Welcome back to another episode of the Outdoor Adventures podcast here on Brownfield Ag News. I'm Brent Barnett. On this week's program, we're joined by Bill Winke, a hunter from Iowa and host of Hoyt's Bowhunting Whitetails. Bill, thanks for coming back on the show. How are you doing today?
Good, Brent. Thank you. It's my pleasure.
Well, we really appreciate the time and interested to hear more about how your season's gone up to this point and looking ahead to the late season for archery hunting. But never a bad time, Bill, to kind of remind the listeners more about yourself and about your family's operation there in northeastern Iowa.
Yeah, I guess I've been in the outdoor industry for a long time. 1990s is when I started, but most recently I've been involved on the video production side, and I have a channel on YouTube. It's the Bill Winke channel, and we produce whitetail deer hunting and land management content primarily. And it focuses on the farm that we now own up in northeast Iowa, like you mentioned. And I've owned land a few different places in Iowa, but this is where I grew up in that area. So it's kind of nice to get back home again.
Curious on the land management side, with us being Brownfield and covering farming and ranching, and how did the crop season go up in your area of the state this year? Were you guys dry at all?
No, we were really good. In fact, our little corner there probably did better than almost any place else in the state. I'm obviously not a consultant when it comes to how the crops did statewide, but man, we caught just about every rain that came through, and we had some really nice timely ones. I think that even the ridge ground did well this year, and it's normally one or the other. Usually the river bottoms, the lowland stuff does really well on dry years, and then the ridges really suffer, and then on wet years, the bottoms kind of they don't do as well, and the ridges do great. Well, we had just the right balance where everything did really well across the boards.
I know we had you on our show last year, Bill, and at that time you and I discussed some habitat projects you had on your farm. Have you seen any results up to this point, or is it still kind of too early to tell?
Yeah, I think all of that is long term. You see incremental improvements, and I think you have to take more, I would say, of a trusting the science approach, because there's been a lot of research done on this. If you do certain types of practices, you get certain types of results, and then over time, these are the benefits that you can see from that. And I think we're just a little bit too early maybe to see that, but we did a lot of the same stuff down in southern Iowa, and I did see the whole life cycle on some of those projects down there, and it definitely makes a difference. In fact, the NRCS even did a big article for the regional magazine on some of the things that we'd done on the farm down there. And, I think that, again, you have to have a little bit of faith in the process, but long term, you can see some probably more important benefits and gains from investing in the habitat first, because you can always plant food plots. We know how to farm in Iowa. Everybody can grow stuff. That's not a big deal, but improving the habitat, that takes a little bit more fine tuning and more patience. But I'd say overall, I'm really super pleased with what's been taking place. And again, we had the perfect growing year. So, we couldn't have asked for better conditions to really make that stuff flourish.
Really want to hear an update on how the season's gone for you and your family this year. For me personally, Bill, night and day difference from last year to this year. Last year, I sat a whole bunch on different areas of public land here. I'm in Marion County, kind of southeastern part of the state, south central, southeastern, right in there. And the whole season, I had one deer total in bow range last year. It was just really hard, really difficult, not a lot of deer density, I guess. I don't know if EHD was a problem, but I heard similar stories from a lot of friends that I know in this area as well. This year, completely different. I ended up tagging my first public land buck ever this year on November 8th, and had more encounters with shooter bucks that week of November 4th than I ever have in my hunting life. And it was just really nice to feel like, okay, I was in the game a whole bunch this year. So with that being said, curious how things are going your way. How are things looking up on the Winke farm?
Well, it's, I think the deer herd is a long-term project too. The farm that I bought was a cattle farm, prior to me purchasing it. So you really kind of had a long way to go. And deer and cows will mix, but they don't mix well. And given their options, the deer would rather live in places where there's no cattle. They don't have that interaction with the cows, which I'm sure can be a little bit upsetting to the deer. But also, the deer eat the same stuff that the cows eat. When the cows are back in the timber, they're browsing pretty hard on a lot of the things that the deer would eat. And I've hunted a lot of cattle farms throughout my life, and you really see that dynamic. But that means that my starting point was kind of a low bar, and I'm still working my way up from that. I think this is the third year of owning that farm, and the combination of taking the cows out of the timber and doing some of this habitat work that we've talked about is really starting to show benefit. But the herd is still not where long term where it's going to be. So my situation is probably not indicative of what statewide people were seeing because of the challenges that I faced with that farm. But all that to say that it was a little bit of a struggle for me this year. I've got a lot of nice younger bucks coming up, but I like to hunt the more mature ones. Give the bucks enough years to get some age to express their genetic potential. It makes the hunting a little bit more challenging. At the same time, it's just I guess it's more taking a steward approach than a consumer approach. And I'm 60 some years old now. We don't need to go into the details on that, but I've been doing it long enough that I'm not quite as hardcore of a consumer as what I was when I was in my 20s, 30s, and even 40s. I'm leaning more toward the stewardship side. And as a result of that, I let a lot of bucks go that other people might have, been excited to shoot, but I just knew they were young deer. And the farm is in that stage of maturing. And so it'll be fun to see over the next 2-3 years, what that all turns into, because I can see sort of like filling the funnel, like you got to have a lot of the younger age class bucks at the top of the funnel in order to, work them all down through until, some really nice older age class bucks come out the bottom. Well, we're still in the process of filling that funnel. And that's, so I didn't shoot one is the bottom line, and really didn't have much for opportunities. There were only 2 bucks on the farm that I was interested in trying to shoot, and they just happened to be the ones that had the personalities or behavior traits that made them really tough to kill. So, I shot a few does, learned a lot, and sometimes those seasons when you aren't successful are the ones where you learn the most because you have to grind so much harder. I bet you learned more last year than you did this year with all the grinding that you had to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And it opened my eyes to new areas that I had never tried or hunted before. And it led me to the spot where I ended up taking that buck November 8th. And Bill, was the most interesting setup. Prior to moving to Iowa, growing up, I'm originally from Northwest Missouri. And, we always hunted on private land growing up. The family had a lease and everything. I didn't even know public land was an option growing up. I don't know if it was really too much of a thing back home. And so it was interesting learning about it when I moved here, and a lot of challenges along the way. But the area that I killed this one this year, there was a public walking path, like a concrete bicycle pedestrian walking path that goes straight through this thick timber. And I'd never seen anything like that before. And I could see the path on one of the hunts from where I was. And I saw a whole bunch of people walking and e-biking and listening to podcasts out loud on their phone. And deer that were in some of the clearings I was in, they just stared at him and watched him walk by and didn't even bother him. So I kind of used that to my advantage and end up entering and exiting with that public trail. So it's kind of interesting.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that'd be awesome. And it kind of shows you the adaptability of the deer too. And I preach it all the time. If you can match the normal, non-threatening human activity that the deer are used to, then you can get away with a lot more when you're, going to and leaving your tree stands, because, that's really the biggest game. The chess match isn't always or even usually exactly where you put your stand. It's how do you get in and out of there without the deer knowing. And boy, you really simplify it when you can take advantage of normal human activity like that. That's really cool.
Yeah. Looking back on your farm, I definitely tune into your program, Bill, and just seeing like from your aerial footage you have of the terrain, the habitat, and the food sources you have now, man, I just feel like you're going to have a whopper show up one of these days because it just looks like a prime area to me.
Yeah, it is. And, there's always challenges. I remember talking to a number of different biologists, but one of the more prominent ones that I've ever talked with in my life, he said, managing deer is easy. Managing people is the hard part. So it really is going to come down to, what happens on the neighboring properties, because I don't own enough to control my own destiny, and if those areas are getting hunted hard and they're shooting bucks that I'm passing up, then it's going to be really hard to produce those kind of deer consistently. And we could get really off topic and talk about neighborhoods, how to find them, how to develop them. But really, if you're trying to kill mature deer anywhere, even in Iowa, you're always going to do better in those areas where there's a number of like-minded landowners, because age is the number one thing when it comes to determining the antler size of bucks. The older they are, the bigger the antlers. It's almost, there are other factors involved, but that's really the number one thing here in Iowa. And, if you just have areas where the deer can get age, you're going to kill some really nice ones. And so that kind of remains to be seen yet. But, all the rest of the pieces are in place. It's just now a matter of just seeing if I can get them. I like 5 years old. That's kind of what I shoot for. And, obviously, when you step into an area for the first time, you don't really know the age of the deer. You kind of have to follow them along, and so I'm 3 years in now, so I've got a pretty good feel for the age of quite a few of the bucks there, by now. And there's not that many of them, that have hit that age. And when they start to, that's when it's going to get interesting. So we'll see. I'm going to reserve my judgment a couple more years.
Before I ask you about the late season coming up, I have to ask, is there any update on the fat buck that was on your farm? Because anybody that watched your show, it felt like, early in the season, early October, there's not really a lot of kill videos out there on folks' shows, but everybody was following the story of the fat buck.
And that was a cool deer. He was obviously very old. You can tell, kind of like people. You can look at people and you can say, I'm looking at you, Brent. I'm thinking, what, late 30s, early 40s?
Oh, man, right? I'm 31.
Okay, early 30s. Okay, well, I missed you by a little bit. And you can kind of do the same thing with deer, too. You can look at them and you can make a basic judgment. But if I'd grown up with you, I'd know exactly how old you were. That's the difference between, having deer that you're used to being around and then others that you just step into and see. Anyway, this deer was clearly very old. And he was as big around as a 55-gallon barrel. And anyway, he was fun to hunt, and he was very daylight active, which surprisingly a lot of those old deer are. But then he just did sort of a 180 on me. Starting in early October, we got a couple good hunts on him, and then he just vanished. And we picked him up one day on 2 different cameras, almost like he was leaving the farm. And the second camera, the first camera was maybe half a mile from where we were hunting him and seeing him. And the second camera was almost a mile away, and he was leaving. And we never saw him again after that. So it was just really weird that he just vacated. And I guess some of them do that. I don't think the hunting pressure did it in his situation. Usually that isn't what kicks them moving. There's just something inside of them. So they're wired. Some of them just do that and some of them don't. And that's what makes them so fascinating. But anyway, he's obviously a deer that had 2 different ranges. And early October came, and he just said, "Oh, it's time to move to either my summer or fall home or whatever," And he was fun to hunt until he just vanished. They're hard to kill when they're not there.
Well, he's missing out. He had that whole ridge to himself.
Man, there was so much food there. He was out there gorging himself every day. We had such a fun time with all the running jokes, about especially my daughter and I. We would sit on camera, and make jokes about just typical stereotypical type jokes of fat people or fat deer. It's like, well, she said something. I said, yeah, I heard that, you know, he had ended up having to go to the cardiac unit at the local hospital because he tried to chase a doe, stuff like that, just kind of playing along with that whole concept of the deer being fat. But anyway, it was fun while it lasted. So
Cool. Well,
hopefully he comes back in next year. We can try again for a few days. But it's frustrating, that and some of them do that. That early October comes around and they vanish.
yeah, it's always a mystery. Archery season will be picking back up around, I think, Christmas here in the state.
Yeah, 23rd.
23rd. Okay, with the gun season's open right now, but Bill, that can be a really challenging time to bow hunt. I know you've talked about that on past shows, but have you had very much success bow hunting around that Christmas time frame before?
It can be okay with the bow, but it's really tough. Like you mentioned, I mean, even in the right setup, it can be really hard because the deer, unless it gets really cold and you get snow, those two pieces will really push them to be more aggressive or more urgent in their feeding behavior. And they'll start going to especially areas where they know the food is concentrated, like maybe a field where some of the corn got left standing, or maybe a food plot where you've got, a half acre of standing beans or something like that, or even, an area with turnips or fall rye, whatever it might be. When it gets cold and it gets snowy like that, it almost like pushes a certain button or flips a switch, and they become a lot more, I guess, urgent in their approach to feeding. And until then, if that doesn't happen, it can be super hard to kill because nothing really is stressing them. It takes stress, and right now there's no rut. So the deer are kind of just laying around, trying to recover, feeding at night. I mean, my trail cameras are showing a lot of nighttime feeding, and surprisingly, a fair amount of nighttime, rutting activity on the food plots too. Bucks are still chasing does. I can see it on the cameras. I don't know how, intense that is, but it's still taking place. They're still there, trying to pick off those last few does that maybe didn't get bred on the first round of the rut, or maybe, some fawns that came into their first estrus this month. So, yeah, I mean, you got to have food, and ideally you have deer that haven't been hunted too hard. And then, the final piece of that equation is the cold and potentially the snow. And you throw all three of those together and you got a decent chance with a bow. But if any one of those pieces is missing, you're probably just going to have a lot of nighttime activity and not very much, daylight action. So it can be really tough. I guess that's the point. And you made the point. I'm just, confirming what you said. Sure. It can be done, and I've killed a few that way. Probably, a handful, 5 to 7, 8, 9, something like that over the years. But you got to figure I've been doing this pretty seriously for 30 plus seasons. Where I've been dedicating almost the entire fall for 30 plus years, and I've only killed, a half dozen to 8, maybe I don't think 10. That's not very many during that many years. And it's not like I'm not out there trying. So anyway, the point is it's worth the effort, but you just have to be realistic and knowing that it's really tough with the bow.
Real quick, kind of off topic. We've been trying to get our little kids introduced into deer and everything. And, we live pretty close to Lake Red Rock, and there's a lot of campgrounds nearby. And there's one in particular close to where we live, Bill, that, obviously they have a bunch of no hunting signs up. It's basically a refuge for wildlife. But like you just drive into a campground and, you get there about 4:30, 4:20 in the afternoon, and there's just like 50 to 60 deer all through this campground, and you just drive right by them. That you stop the vehicle, they're 5 yards from you, they don't care. And that's just been the biggest kick for our kids. They just absolutely love it.
Yeah, no, that's and unfortunately some people think that's the way the real deer are.
Exactly. Not even
they definitely aren't. my life has been a testament to the fact that you get out in the real world and man, they're a different animal, but that's pretty cool. Yeah. How old are the kids?
5, 4, and then our youngest is 18 months. So she's just for the ride. But the two older ones, man, they I'd take my binoculars for them and they look at them and stuff. And one day when we were down there, we saw probably a mid 140s class buck. That was kind of cool.
Yeah, no, that is cool. And I bet you they flood in there when the gun season starts too. You know, get pushed into that area because no doubt they know where they're safe.
Oh yeah, definitely. Like you said, it's just not how it is normal, but it's just kind of cool.
Yeah, it's fun though. It's cool.
And how they act and everything. But
yeah, it'd be nice to get some photos too while you can. You know, take a bunch of pictures because you don't get that many opportunities to be that close to deer.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Bill, hey, thanks a lot for coming on the show this week. Know you have a busy schedule. How can people watch your show online?
Okay, yeah, just go to the Bill Winke channel on YouTube and it's all right there.
Well, until next time, Bill, we appreciate it and hope you have a good Christmas, okay?
Yeah, thanks. Merry Christmas to you too, Brent.
Thank you. That's Bill Winke, host of Hoyt's Bowhunting Whitetails, right here on Outdoor Adventures. We always appreciate you joining us here on the podcast. You can watch all of our video updates on the Brownfield Ag News YouTube channel or listen to the audio version wherever you get your podcast. I'm Brent Barnett with Brownfield. Have a great weekend.